Joining us now, Brett Tolman, former U.S. attorney from Utah, was appointed by George Bush, and he supports criminal justice reform, including supporting policies that reduce the number of individuals who head to prison in the first place and cut the number of those who return to prison after serving their time, which improves public safety. And, of course, we've been over this on our show for years and years. The United States has the highest incarceration rate by 2-1, almost 2-1, of any free democratic society in the world. The United States has the highest incarceration rate of any major developed country. Forget free. Higher than China, higher than the Chi-Coms, higher than Russia, might be higher than Cuba. It's very high. Our rate of returning prisoners is off the charts. Now, there's a lot. We've talked about this for a very long time. Crazy mandatory sentences like 3 strikes you're out and things like that contribute to it. The fact that we have gone to a prison system which is privatized, and these companies that own prisons on the open stock market, they prosper only by increasing the population of prisoners because they get paid by the bed. Craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. So all these things going on now. Former attorney from Utah, Brett Tolman, with us, and I'm so you saw the other day our Attorney General Jeff Sessions memo outlining, this was on Friday, outlining the reversal of criminal justice policy, and he wants to go back to mandatory minimum sentences. I really don't know where Sessions is coming at through this. And also, Trump campaigned on incarceration and prison reform. Trying to sort this out for us now, Brett Tolman, former U.S. attorney. Good to have you with us, Brett.
Thanks, John. Good to be with you.
All right. Trump said one thing, Sessions doing the opposite. What's going on?
You know, it's fascinating. When the Attorney General was a state senator, he tried to get large prison sentences in his state for second-time offenses for marijuana. And so this is a pattern that he's kind of exhibited through his career. But the problem with it is it takes us back decades, and it ignores data that we've been gathering in other states. And in conservative law and order states, they've figured it out, you know, much sooner than the feds have figured it out, and that is you can't incarcerate your way out of the drug problem. And so you take places like Texas, they focused on rehabilitation. They ended up closing 3 prisons and saving $3 billion, and their crime rate fell dramatically, and their recidivism rate fell dramatically, even lower than the already, national falling numbers. So we're not learning. We're going backwards on the federal system.
Yeah, I really don't get where the Attorney General is coming from on this, and I know he's got a history of this, but it's counter to what the president campaigned on. He campaigned on prison reform, and look, I've been railing against these minimum mandatory sentences, Brett Tolman, for a long time. They poll well in buzzwords, lock them up, 3 strikes, you're out, things of that nature. But the percentage of people that we have in prison in this country is crazy. And look, if you committed a violent crime, you ought to be there, no question. But for a second possession of marijuana, I mean, it's insanity that we're trying to incarcerate people for this. It's absolute. Now, I'm going to get, as soon as you go off, the text and calls are going to start with my Law and Order audience that are going to say, if you know the law, abide by it. If you abide by it, you don't go to jail. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm going to get all that. I get it every time I have one of these dialogues. That's the lock 'em up crew. And I respect my listeners, but it makes no sense that you're putting people in prison for possessing marijuana, whether it's the second time or the third time. It's one thing if you find them selling it on a street corner to a high school. It's another thing if they're just doing it. I mean, it's nuts.
Well,
Am I right?
You're exactly right. You can be tough on crime, and figure something out so you're also smart on crime. And what we have, I come from a law and order background, a father who was a police officer in California. I was a federal prosecutor. I put individuals in prison for decades because we have these very harsh, strong, mandatory minimums. But what people aren't understanding is that often it's nonviolent and it's low-level offenders. You take Weldon Angelos. He had virtually no criminal history, and he gets caught with a dime bag of marijuana. He gets a 55-year sentence in federal prison. Now, you tell me, does it take 55 years at $30,000 per year to properly punish and deter an individual that has a bag of marijuana? That's what we're talking about, is fixing the malfunctions in the law, and not necessarily adopting a policy that's leniency.
It's insane. And, he appealed that. He tried to fight it, and it went nowhere because the state has the power to do that. And it's scary. But, look, we're all for law and order, all right? I mean, without that, you have chaos. But, Brett, there's something wrong in a society when you have the highest percentage of your citizens incarcerated in the developed world. I mean, doesn't that tell you there's a problem?
That's right, and you've been speaking on this for a long time.
Years,
you've
Brett,
figured
years.
it out. A lot of people have figured it out, and unfortunately, what we need are policyholders to figure it out.
Because these catchwords that are just easy to say, dating back to the 3 strikes you're out thing, which I thought was a disaster. But the other thing that has really bothered me, and I want you to get the comment on this, Brett Tolman, is there's something sick with a society that privatizes prisons. They go on the public stock exchange, and they're incented to fill up their beds with prisoners. I mean, look, I'm all for, reducing the size of federal government, but there's just some things that I just don't think that private companies should be involved in. And we got all these prisons. They make hundreds of millions of dollars. They're highly profitable, and they're profitable only if you keep putting people in jail. Now, then here's what they do, Brett. Think about how sick this is. They then hire lobbyists to go roam the halls of Congress to initiate and keep up these mandatory sentences, not because they believe in law and order, but they want to fill up their beds with American citizen prisoners so their companies that are paying them the lobby fees can make more money by owning the prisons. Tell me that's not just sick.
Well, it is disturbing, and it is only accentuated when you have the Attorney General then requiring all of his prosecutors to charge the highest provable offenses. So now you've taken any discretion away from the prosecutors. So not only do you have the lobbyists effectuating change in the laws so that the mandatory minimums are out of whack, now you've limited the ability of any prosecutor to make a sound decision based on some of those factors. And you highlight one of the more disturbing issues in the criminal justice system today.
It's a scary situation, and I get the fact that our Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and I'm a big backer of his. I think he's doing overall a great job, and I want him to be successful, and I believe in him. But look, I mean, you're never going to agree with everything that anybody does, but this is really, I tell you what, Brett Tolman, as you know, this is a very serious issue in America. And you start doing these mandatory sentences, and you're right. I mean, the executive order, if you will, that the chief lawman in the United States, Jeff Sessions, sent out was for his prosecutors to pursue the maximum for everybody without discretion. I think that's dangerous and scary because a lot of people, bad, and I just said this the other day, bad things happen to good people. You get caught doing dumb things that you shouldn't do. But, you think about the guy with a dime bag of marijuana, 55 years in prison. I mean, basically they ended his life and that of his family for possessing pot, which he was not even distributing. He was just had it.
Well, let's punish these folks for violating the law. Let's have an appropriate punishment. But I was there in Congress when working as chief counsel to the judiciary over crime and terrorism issues, when I heard many senators say, let's increase the mandatory minimum here or here, because that's going to be really tough for the Democrats to vote against it. And so it became a political, pawn in the game of chess, as opposed to doing, rational, substance-based analysis of punishment. And so right now we're ending up with a system that is over-punishing. I have many stories, obviously, but I think of my friend who was a prosecutor for 30 years, a drug prosecutor in the federal system for 30 years. He said he got one kingpin his entire time. Other than that, it was low-level offenders who are serving long mandatory minimums. And it's the taxpayers that pay for that.
It's crazy. I mean, it just makes no sense. All right, I need you to answer this question from one of our listeners. Tim in Virginia Beach says, could you please ask Brett Tolman, somebody got 55 years of possession for a dime bag of pot. You've got to be kidding me. Was this in Virginia? Did somebody commute his sentence? What happened?
So it was in Utah, and it actually resulted in the federal judge. Resigning. It was one of the catalysts that caused the judge that sentenced him to resign, because his hands were bound by the mandatory minimums that applied. He ended up serving nearly 20 years sentence. And then through some of the efforts of the prior administration and the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Utah, they were able to work out a way in which he could get out of that sentence early. But there's many. That was after he served nearly 2 decades, though, in federal prison. But there's many that don't get such luxury.
I tell you what, even that, serving 2 decades for possessing a dime bag of marijuana that you were not distributing, but simply were getting high. Yeah. It's just, to the most toughest law enforcement person out there, this just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Joe in Richmond says, alcohol is worse than marijuana, but the government and the politicians has their hands all over alcohol. Yes, I get that one. All right, man. It's crazy, but keep fighting. We're out of time. People want more information. Brett Tolman, where do they go?
Well, if you want to get involved, tell them to reach out to folks like the U.S. Justice Action Network, who's leading, some of the efforts to reform in these areas. So that's the U.S. Justice Action Network.
All right, U.S. Justice Action Network. Brett Tolman, former U.S. attorney from Utah, appointed by George Bush. Thanks for being with us, man.
Thanks, John. Take care.